Rose Ann's 3 brothers left for Oklahoma with the inheritance, the wagon, and even the father's revolver. She kept the house, the July burnt land, and the death certificate of William Hale, dead of tuberculosis on the 2nd of June, 1882. None of the 3 looked back. None said her name in the moment the wheels lifted the dust from the yard. None agreed to split a single thing. Rose Ann was 23. She could milk a cow, sew, read aloud well enough to check a deed. She knew nothing the men in those parts counted as useful in a woman without a husband and without land. So she stayed. For 3 weeks she stayed, eating what the garden still gave, drinking water from the well, watching the road that did not bring anyone. On the day of the funeral, she dug the grave herself. The neighbors brought pie, coffee, low-voiced condolences. The 3 brothers stood in the cemetery with their hands behind their backs. When the priest finished, they left before the body was lowered, not for home, for the saloon. That night, Rose Ann locked the door, ate her bread alone, and counted the money her father had hidden inside the mattress. There wasn't much. It was what there was. In the 4th week, the barn came down in a hailstorm. In the 5th, she sold the cattle that were left for $12 and an old saddle. With the money, she bought flour, salt, a wool blanket, and a pair of boots that fit the left foot and almost fit the right. The rest she tucked into the pocket of her apron, sewn shut on the inside with fishing line, because an unmarried woman's apron, in Kansas of '82, was the first place a man reached for. Before she left, she dug a grave behind the house and buried her mother's 2nd shoe, her father's Bible, and the photograph of their wedding. She marked the grave with a cross of 2 planks from the barn. She prayed. She did not ask God to protect her. She asked him to make it rain in Oklahoma so the 3 brothers would remember what they had done and stumble in the mud. The first week of the walk was the slowest, and not from weakness, from direction. Rose Ann could not read a map. She knew the name of a city her father had mentioned once, before the cough began to steal his air. Cheyenne, a big city, he said, where the men wore wide-brimmed hats and the women wore gloves even in the heat. Rose Ann wanted a place where no one knew the name of the 3 brothers who had left without her. The road was what they called a trail. Red dust, cattle bones bleached white by the sun, wheel tracks that crossed at random. In the morning, she walked 6 hours. At noon, she rested under a tree, ate breadcrumbs with water, and slept 20 minutes with the kitchen knife in her hand. In the afternoon, she walked 3 more hours. At night, she built a small fire, listened to the coyotes, and counted the stars for sport, not faith. On the 12th day, she found a dead cow hand beside a dead horse. The horse was still warm. The cow hand was not. Rose Ann did not stop. She took the saddle off the animal, the water canteen, the hat, and $3 from the dead man's trouser pocket. She tied back her hair with a strip of leather, settled the hat on her own head, and kept walking. The sun did not stop for her. The road did not stop for her. She did not stop for herself. On the 20th day, she came to a settlement called Laramie. She bought a plate of beans for 5 cents, slept in a public stable, and left before sunrise. On the 30th day, she saw for the first time the mountains her father called the Rockies. They were the size of what she felt, blue at the top, white in the middle, dark below. On the 38th day, she walked into Cheyenne. There were wagons, horses, men with revolvers on their hips, women in long dresses crossing the street with their heads down. A wooden sign on a post read, Baron Hale, Cattle Buy and Sell, Office on Main Street. Rose Ann looked at the sign. She looked at her own worn boots. She looked at the sign again, and she decided that if the world was going to treat her like a thing, she was going to walk in through the front door. She knocked on the door of the cattle baron's office before noon. He was about 50, broad shoulders, a trimmed beard, eyes that smelled of money and dust. Behind him, a framed drawing on the wall showed a ranch with cattle on the grass and a 2-story house. It was the empire she was to inherit half of, and she did not yet know it. "My name is Rose Ann," she said. "I can read, I can count, I can cook for 20 people. I walked here from Kansas, and I have nowhere to go. You need a housekeeper." That afternoon, William Hale did not ask Rose Ann to sit. He showed her the house. 2 stories of dark wood, a porch that ran the length of it, a kitchen with an iron stove that looked like an altar, a dining room with a table for 24, a sitting room with red velvet curtains, and an office where the Baron closed the month's books with a gold pin Rose Ann could not take her eyes off. She started the next day. Up at 4, lit the stove, made coffee, bread, eggs, bacon, oatmeal. She cooked for the cowboys from the ranch, for the hired man who slept in the barn, and for the Baron, who took his coffee without a word, hat still on his head, reading the Cheyenne paper. Rose Ann learned in a week that his silence was approval, and his anger a pen striking the desk. The kitchen smelled of ash in the morning and of roasting meat at night. The pans were cast iron, and 3 times a week she dragged the largest one down to the well to scrub it with sand and soap. Her hands, which had only known needle and bundle, went red and cracked in 2 weeks. Eleanor offered a pair of leather gloves. Rose Ann refused. She took the grease the cowboys used on their harnesses and rubbed it into her own hands at night, with the door locked. The Baron's daughter was called Eleonora. She was 19, light-eyed, with the manners of someone who had never carried a bucket of water. On the first Sunday, she came down to the kitchen, asked for tea, and said, in her soft voice, that her father had been worried about a man named Theodore Voss. He was a neighbor to the north, owner of another ranch, 10 times the size of Hale's, and he had asked for Eleonora's hand 3 times in 6 months. The Baron had refused 3 times. Voss had doubled the offer. That month, he offered $19,000 in cattle and a new house in Cheyenne for the bride. The Baron refused again, but the hired man who served at the table whispered in the stable that Voss was not a man to take no twice. On the second day, after lunch, the Baron called Rose Ann to the office. He sat behind the desk with the gold pen in his hand and a stamped paper in front of him. He said, low, that he needed her for something. It was not kitchen work. It was contract work. "I have a daughter who will not marry Voss," he said, "and I will not force her. But Voss does not understand what he does not understand. If he sees there is no marriage in this house, he will understand in his own way. I am going to tell him I have married again. To you, 1 year of contract. Then we end it. We say it did not work, and I return your share with interest." The Baron pushed the paper. The paper spoke of wages, of rooms, of the treatment of a wife. In small print, at the bottom of the page, there was a second part. Rose Ann read it out loud, slowly, because the office light was weak and she did not trust her own eyes. If William Hale dies before the end of the contract, Rose Ann Hale, born Rose Ann Thornton, of Kansas, receives half of the ranch, half of the cattle, half of the pasture lands of Laramie County, in full ownership, transferable to the heirs she names. The other half stays with Eleanora Hale, free of debt, free of Voss, free of whoever she may choose. Rose Ann looked at the Baron. She read the clause again, syllable by syllable. The clause said that, if he died before the year was up, she would keep the half. In Wyoming, that year, a cowboy's widow got at most a good horse and a train ticket. A baron's widow got half of what her husband had. Rose Ann calculated fast on her fingers, the way her father had taught her. Half of Hale's cattle was enough to buy the whole of Kansas back. Half of the land was enough to support all three brothers and still have some left over. She did not want the brothers. She wanted what they had thrown away. She picked up the pen. Her hand did not shake. She signed. The Baron signed just below. He sealed the document with wax and locked it in the safe behind the portrait of his dead wife. He looked at Rose Ann and said in a low voice that the house was hers too from that moment on. She could come in through the front door. She could sit in the sitting room. She could call him William and not Sir when they were alone. The year of the contract did not begin well. Voss took the wedding by proxy invitation with a silence that ran the whole territory. No congratulations, no gift, no gun. Within 3 months, the North Pasture's fence was torn down and 24 head of cattle were gone. In the spring, 30 more. In the summer, the hired man was found with a marking knife in his neck, and the saddle beside the body bore a cut V. The same day, Rose Ann locked the kitchen door, wrote 3 letters, and sent each out with a different cowboy. One went to the sheriff, one to Elias Cohn, the lawyer. The third, unsigned, stayed in a drawer and said in 4 lines that the next cut V would be on Voss's own leather. Rose Ann, that week, sat for the first time in the sitting room. She asked William to send for a lawyer out of Cheyenne. The lawyer, a thin man named Elias Cohn, came in on the train with a black satchel. He looked at the contract, raised an eyebrow, and said, low, that the document was fireproof. The Baron nodded. Voss, when he learned, sent an emissary offering $30,000 for the half of the property. Rose Ann refused without opening the letter. In the 8th month of the contract, William woke with pain in his chest. In the 9th, he did not come down to the table anymore. Rose Ann cooked, climbed the stairs with the tray, sat beside the bed, and read him the ranch reports Elias Cohn sent every week. William, for the first time, called her by her name. He said once that the apron of the unmarried woman was gone. He said another time that Kansas had not thrown her away. It had thrown her forward. In the 11th month, on a January morning before daylight, William Hale stopped breathing. Eleanora cried in the next room, with her face buried in the pillow, for a full hour. Rose Ann did not cry. She got up, lit the lamp, went down the stairs, crossed the sitting room in the dark, and entered the office. She took the gold pen, locked the door, and read the contract line by line without skipping a comma. Outside, the old cook who had stayed for her own husband's funeral months before poured a cognac for the portrait of the dead wife. Rose Ann, with the door shut, signed the acceptance of the inheritance in the witness of Elias Cohn, who had come in on the first morning train and waited on the porch with the black satchel. That afternoon, Voss rode up to the house. He came through the front door without knocking, with 2 armed men behind him. He took off his hat, sat down in William's chair, and told Rose Ann she could keep her half. But the other half was his daughter now, and his daughter was the bride he had always wanted. The armed men stood against the wall, hand on their revolvers. The old cook, who had watched Rose Ann cross the prairie 40 days before, slipped back to the kitchen and began to heat the water for the coffee, slowly, as if time were something else. Rose Ann served coffee to all 3. She set the gold pen on the table in the middle, on top of the open document. She looked at Voss and said, in the steady voice of a woman who had walked 40 days across the desert, that Eleonora was not his, never would be, and that if he walked into that house again without an invitation, the second half would also be contested in court, and that Elias Cohn already had the papers ready. Voss looked at the pen. He looked at Rose Ann. He rose, slowly, and left. Out in the road, he mounted his horse and said to the hired man on his left that a housekeeper from Kansas ought not to know how to talk that way. The hired man answered that a housekeeper from Kansas with half an empire and a Jewish lawyer out of Cheyenne ought to. Voss spurred the horse and vanished into the dust. That night, Rose Ann sat in William's chair in the sitting room with the gold pen in her hand. Eleonora came down the stairs, sat across from her, and asked for tea. Rose Ann made tea for the 2 of them. She set down the cup, opened the black satchel Cohn had left, and began to read the names of the ranch cowboys, one by one, out loud. When she finished, she said to Eleonora in a low voice that the year of the contract was over, but the work of the house was still open. For a housekeeper. For good, if she wanted.